Our lighting guy quit. Well, good afternoon. I'm going to read from a college textbook of mine, and I'm sure this is copyrighted material, and I'm sure I'm not allowed to read it, but it was a great textbook. This lady was my teacher in community college, and this was a really good college composition class, but it was an honors class or something that meant we didn't have to fill out worksheets. We actually got to have discussions. And this is a really good essay that I remember from this book that I love. There's another poem in this book that I love too, but we're going to read this, and we're going to give the guy credit for who he was, so that maybe nobody owes me for reading somebody else's work. But Leanne would like to show you my old ticket from 2008 to a wonderful IMAX theater in the National Air and Space Museum. I think you can still go see To Fly there. It's an old video, and I guess we probably have more fantastic drone footage now than is even in To Fly, but To Fly is one of the first efforts to see the world from above, and it's a cinematic effort that plays pretty regularly down at, it used to at the IMAX Theater in National Air and Space Museum, To Fly. They have all kinds of IMAX movies in there. I mean, they used to, but To Fly was the classic. I hope it's still playing. All right. We're going to read Intense by Richard Brookhiser, a graduate of Yale University. Richard Brookhiser, born 1955, is a senior editor at the National Review and a contributor to Time, The New Yorker, and The New York Observer, and The Atlantic. He is the editor, contributor, or author of several books, including The Way of the Wasp, How It Made America and How It Can Save It, So to Speak, in 1991. In Intense, published in the May 1993 issue of The Atlantic, Brookhiser defines the term and explains how it accounts for the behavior of both individuals and nations. And I hope, I don't make any money off this shit, so hopefully there's no problem with me reading somebody else's work. This is really good. All right. My wife and I were having lunch. She was talking. What do my friends mean, she asked, when they call me intense? I didn't know what to answer at first, not because I didn't know what she was talking about, but because I knew so perfectly that it was hard to put it into words. My wife is 5 feet tall. On the pocket dictionary of pet names I have bestowed on her over the years, most of which have had a half-life of about a month, one was Bundle, short for bundle of energy. When I think of her as a car, I think of a sports car, usually a Miata, red, or the cars in the cartoons I watched on TV as a kid, which walked down highways on tire feet and had eyelashes over their headlights and grins for grill work. If a pet squirrel accomplished anything by running around in a wheel, if the shaft of the wheel turned on a gas jet, which heated a tea kettle, whose steam floated a small parachute that brushed a light switch as it rose, and if the squirrel understood the process and desired the result, then my wife could be that squirrel. Intense, I told my wife, was the word my pothead friends used in college in the 70s, when they were at that stage of being stoned in which they were fully conscious of the activities of the unstoned, but lacked the desire or the capacity to participate in any way. When someone who was not stoned, usually me, did something, they would say, with a gravity that was exactly midway between satire and admiration. Satire of anyone who would make such unseemly efforts, admiration for the ability to do so. That's intense. What normal activity is to the stoned, the activity of those who are intense is to those who are normal. I was not making any headway, so I decided to list intense people. Hillary is intense, I said. Bill is not. Our 42nd president, hand pumper, hugger, hugger of the tree hugger, smiler, glows with the flow, interested in 100 policies, committed to about 3, resilient, intelligent, eager to please and be pleased. He is all of these things, but he is not intense. The First Lady, author of articles in law journals, this year earning less money than her husband, probably for the first time in her life, lived in Arkansas not because she was born there, but because she chose to. She is intense. My wife began to see. I went through the other presidents. Bush, not intense. Reagan, not intense. Carter, intense. Ford, come on. Nixon, so intense that he will probably live on pure intensity to give a soundbite at Clinton's funeral. Johnson, not intense. Paradoxical, I'll get back to it. Kennedy, not intense. Eisenhower, very intense, though he pretended not to be. George Washington, the most intense president we have ever had. Goebbels, I added, was also intense, though Hitler was not. Lenin was intense. Trotsky was not. Madonna is intense. Marilyn was not. My wife thought I was making things muddy again, but I was just getting rolling. Characters in fiction can be intense. Isabel Archer, the lady in The Portrait of a Lady, is intensity in the drawing room. She spent half her time thinking of beauty and bravery and magnanimity. She had a fixed determination to regard the world as a place of brightness, of free expansion, of irresistible action. She thought it would be detestable to be afraid or ashamed. Natty Bumppo, the friend of the, I don't even know how to pronounce this word, eponymous? Somebody has to say that to me. I don't know how to say lots of things. Character, I heard once it said, I never make fun of somebody who mispronounces a word. It means they learned it reading. In The Last of the Mohicans is intensity in the forest. He threw back a foot and slowly raised the muzzle from the earth. The motion was steady, uniform, and in one direction. When on a perfect level, it remained for a single moment, without tremor or variation, as though both man and rifle were carved in stone. During that stationary instant, it poured forth its contents in a bright, glancing sheet of flame. Bullseye. In the I can say this name, Karamazov family, Aloysia and Ivan are intense, which is why they spend so much time arguing about the Grand Inquisitor. Their relatives, for various reasons, are not. Give me explanations, my wife howled. How intense of her, I thought. Here goes. The defining quality of intense is that the motor never stops. The engine always runs. The battery always hums. Within the psychic boiler room of the intense person, there's always at least a skeleton crew, and that crew never takes a break. Intense cuts across such categories as good and evil, great and mediocre, success and failure, happiness and the lack of it. Jimmy Carter in office was decent, piddling, unsuccessful, and troubled, where Lenin was wicked, grand, triumphant, and possibly happy. He was known to laugh at the murder of his enemies. But from each man came the whir of wheels, endlessly turning. Activity, to be intense, must also be deliberate, directed, self-propelled. Intense requires an exercise of will. This is what distinguishes the achievements of the intense from those of the non-intense. Adolf Hitler, for example, accomplished a great deal. He left the world not a better place, but certainly a very different one. Yet we know from the accounts of his colleagues that Hitler's motor often stopped. He got up late in the morning. He was subject to bouts of inaction or inattention. He thought of himself as having an artistic temperament. The furies that issued from him were distillations of his character, which he could no more alter than he could change his hair color by thinking about it. This thoughtless quality characterizes other busy but not intense types. Lyndon Johnson, William F. Buckley Jr., Francis of Assisi. Even when they seem to be consciously choosing, their choices are driven by uncontrollable personal forces. In Johnson's case, ambition and grievance. Their activity is an exfoliation of their natures. They do not do, they are. This alternative to intense may be called narcissistic. Another way of not being intense is to be depressive. While the narcissist has no need of will, since his actions occur spontaneously, making up pronunciations, the depressive would like very much to summon some, but can rarely manage it. His failures leave him in a condition of stasis. Being depressive is not the same as being depressed. Intense can also get depressed whenever the will is exercised ineffectively or inefficiently, and when that happens, intense takes it hard. When the depressive gets depressed, which is often, he implodes silently. Samuel Johnson, one of the great depressives, spent several years on the edge of a nervous breakdown, with no one knowing but his closest friends. When Intense gets depressed, the whole world hears about it. The Intense have complicated relations with their fellows. Toward the depressive, Intense feels mildly patronizing, or, if love softens him, sympathetic. For a narcissist, he may feel confused admiration, mistakenly seeing a fellow busy bee who has somehow shucked off the burdens of effort. These attitudes never last. Sooner or later, the depressive or the narcissist lets Intense down, usually by failing to meet some obligation. The depressive out of inability, the narcissist because it hasn't registered. Then Intense reacts with an indignation and scorn. Bertrand Russell, a 24-carat narcissist, recorded in his essay Eminent Men I Have Known that the most impressive, read Intense, public man he ever met was Gladstone, with whom he had an after-dinner drink of port when he was 17 and Gladstone was 80. For a long time we sat in silence. At last, in his booming bass voice, he condescended to make his one and only remark. This is very good port they have given me, but why have they given it me in a claret glass? Since then I have faced infuriated mobs, angry judges, and hostile governments, but never again have I felt such terror. Depressives are better able to put up with this kind of treatment at the hands of the Intense. They are good at putting up with things generally, since they are unable to do anything else. Intense nags them, goads them, rarely lets them alone, and even when he is not actively on their case, they feel the draft generated by the breeze of his bustle. But since a will of their own is something they would dearly like to have, they regard the Intense with helpless yearning. Narcissists pay as much attention to the Intense as they pay to anything else, which in the normal course of things is none, though when Intense grows indignant over some, to narcissists' imaginary failing, they respond with incomprehension. Are the Intense ever happy? As often as anyone else in the world. Narcissists are happy when they shine. Depressives are happy when the world shines around them. The Intense are happy when coming down the home stretch. Do the Intense ever rest? Never. The Intense are found in almost all walks of life. Generals, Caesars, saints, Thomas Aquinas, athletes, Ted Williams. Only a few fields are free of them. Pop stars who work in the two-dimensional realm of iconography tend to be narcissists. Madonna is the exception to the exception, but she needed to be intense in order to become an icon without much in the way of looks or talent. Intensity is unevenly distributed among nations. However, France is intense, so is Ireland, so is Spain. The journalist Luigi Barzini wrote that when the Spaniards marched into Italy in their black garments in 1529, the Italians in their gaily colored silks looked at each other and thought, there goes the Renaissance. If they had been dopers, they would have said, come intense. But are Italians more intense than they let on? Certainly ancient Romans were intense. Where did their intensity go? If Barzini is right, it went into strenuous efforts to keep up appearances. So every demonstration of Italian style and skill, from a Milanese designer's designs to a waiter's smoothing of a tablecloth, is an example not of irrepressible joie de vivre, but of tireless effort. Japanese, what do you think? Koreans, even more intense, they survived Japanese occupation. Ancient Greeks, brilliant narcissists. They invented Narcissus. Jews, intense, except when they escape all those commandments. Trotsky was a narcissist. So was Benjamin Disraeli, unless, like the Italians, he was simply acting. Russians are depressives. So are Germans, whose moments of efficiency are only moods. So are the British, except for a beleaguered puritanical minority, to which Margaret Thatcher happens to belong. The most intense people in England, by and large, came here on the Mayflower. Would they come here today? It is pretty clear that America is becoming less intense, and that the narcissists and depressives multiply apace. Americans once disciplined their feelings. Now they get in touch with them. A culture that was molded by the base psalm book and Poor Richard's almanac yearns for the day when it will be able to amuse itself with 300 cable stations. Waiting for this to be a call for me. some of them adapted for virtual reality. Our drift from intense can be measured by comparing the last few presidents with the first. George Washington, who had a tremendous temper but is said to have only lost it once in public, whose public monument in the nation's capital is not a statue or even a real building, but a 555-foot tall marlin spike, would be lucky today if he could join the White House Honor Guard, which has nothing to do with virtue or happiness. Poets, mystics, vintners, people who savor earth and go to heaven are all found outside the ranks of the intense. But the struggles of nations, especially in a commercial age, seem to favor nations whose people have strong wills, which is what keeps the light bulbs shining over their heads and in the workplace. That, anyway, is the kind of success America has had, a kind it seems increasingly unqualified to pursue. But forgetting your country, are you intense? This is the sort of question no one can answer for himself. Each of us thinks he is more complicated than anyone else, possibly more complicated than anyone actually is. Walker Piercy, deep depressive, once noted that anyone reading an astrological column can recognize himself in the descriptions for all 12 signs. So it is with the intense, and with the narcissistic and the depressive. If you want to know which you are, ask a friend. If you do, you are probably intense. Isn't that fun? It's fun. I'm gonna go eat my pizza before somebody comes and yells at me. But there's a poem in here that I absolutely adore. I'm tempted to read you real quick before I disappear. I actually have it memorized for the most part, but I wouldn't want to miss a line. It's a great book. It's short articles and essays, and here it is. How long is it? It's not Hallow. It's by Alistair Reid. A Scotsman who prefers to live in Spain, Alistair Reid, born 1926, is a poet, translator, essayist, writer of children's books, and lecturer. Holding a master's degree from Scotland's St. Andrews University, Reid has lectured at schools in England, Spain, and the United States. He has had several books of poems published, has translated much of the poetry of Latin American poet Pablo Neruda, and has been a staff writer for The New Yorker since 1959. Curiosity appeared in the first New Yorker and was then included in the collection Weathering, 1959. This is a great poem. Curiosity may have killed the cat. More likely, the cat was just unlucky, or else curious to see what death was like, having no cause to go on licking paws or fathering litter on litter of kittens, predictably. Nevertheless, to be curious is dangerous enough, to distrust what is always said, what seems, to ask odd questions, interfere in dreams, smell rats, leave home, have hunches, does not endear cats to those doggy circles where well-smelt baskets, suitable wives, good lunches are the order of things, and where prevails much wagging of incurious heads and tails. Face it, curiosity will not cause us to die, only lack of it will. Never to want to see the other side of the hill, or that improbable country where living is an idol, although a probable hell, would kill us all. Only the curious have, if they live, a tale worth telling at all. Dogs say cats love too much, are irresponsible, are dangerous, marry too many wives, desert their children, chill all dinner tables with tales of their 9 lives. Well, they're lucky. Let them be 9-lived and contradictory, curious enough to change, prepared to pay the cat price, which is to die and die again and again, each time with no less pain. A cat minority of one is all that can be counted on to tell the truth, and what cats have to tell on each return from hell is this: that dying is what the living do, that dying is what the loving do, and that dead dogs are those who never know that dying is what to live each has to do. Have a blessed day. Listen to the birds.